Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today. My name is Inder. I am part of the administrative team here at the Institute of Holistic Nutrition. I wanted to just give you guys a little bit of an idea of the itinerary for the afternoon. So we're going to start off with a 1-hour lecture, followed by a 15-minute Q&A. So if you could pop your questions throughout the presentation into the Q&A box rather than in the chat box, put them into the Q&A box. And then we are going to address the questions at the end, okay? We also have a special giveaway for one of the guests here today. The giveaway, though, there is a caveat. You have to stay until the end. So we are going to present, we're going to do our presentation. And then after the Q&A, I will let you know who the winner is. And I will be figuring that out. So one lucky winner, this is what the prize is. One lucky winner will receive a free HTMA package, including trace elements, HTMA test kit, customized results report, a review of initial client intake, and a 75-minute consultation with Lisa. So this package is valued at $450, so it's amazing, and I really hope that you all stay, and I wish you all luck in winning. Today our webinar is a part of Lisa's hair tissue mineral analysis course that she runs through the Institute of Holistic Nutrition. The topic of discussion today will be thyroid and iodine. So this is a really great topic. I think it's so important, and it's so much fun to know this information and be able to, share that with our clients. I'm going to just read our bio of Lisa that we have here on our website, just so you can have a bit of an idea about Lisa. So Lisa got certified in functional diagnostics, which bridges the gap between clinical nutrition and functional medicine through the Functional Diagnostic Nutrition Institute in the US. She is a mineral analysis expert, a multi-time kettlebell sport world champion, and a health, wellness, and fitness advocate. Lisa discovered HTMA, hair tissue mineral analysis testing, back in 2016 and studied initially under Dr. Rick Malter, PhD, a pioneer of HTMA research in clinical practice for over 40 years. Lisa chose to specialize in mineral balance after this specific diagnostic test identified the root cause of her chronic fatigue and estrogen dominance. Lisa works exclusively with HTMA, but is certified with access to a multitude of diagnostic tests. Lisa has helped thousands dig to the root cause of health issues by focusing on mineral balance and a holistic approach. She most recently expanded her practice to include a focus on canine HTMA testing, changing the lives and lifespan of dogs. Lisa is a longstanding member of the Association of Functional Diagnostic Nutrition Professionals and is board certified holistic health practitioner with the American Association of Drugless Practitioners. She is also the founder of Vicon Supplements. Vicon means performance in Slovak. Lisa wanted to simplify protocols for clients and offer an immediate, affordable solution for mineral balance, containing everything needed after testing. Vicon custom powders are the first ever all-encompassing supplement completely based on HTMA science. Lisa co-hosts an annual week-long summit to provide excellence and authenticity by bringing some of the world's experts in HTMA together. Her popular human optimization podcast runs on all podcast channels. She is a health, wellness, and fitness advocate and believes that everyone should have access to natural health products and practices of their choice. And her goal is to support the change of this in Canada. She is considered an expert in the field of mineral balance and holistic health. So there you go. So that is Lisa. I loved your bio and I was like, Lisa, I'm reading it all. I want everyone to know. So we're
I'm
so
like, who is that? Who is
excited.
that? Is that me?
That's you. Yeah.
Oh
So
my
we're
goodness.
so happy to have you here with us at IHN, and your course is always very successful. And I think it's so important. And we're so glad that we, have the opportunity to offer this to our fellow students and other, healthcare practitioners. So
Thank you.
I'm going to mute my mic and I'm going to turn off my screen and hand it all over to you, Lisa.
Perfect. All right. Well, everybody just give me a few seconds. I'm going to pull up my slideshow and we will get started. And yes, who is that person? When you hear your own bio, it's like, who is that? I'm not even sure. And so thanks for joining us today. I think you're going to really enjoy this presentation. And it's very near and dear to my heart because I have used iodine for over a decade and have thyroid problems myself and have had mineral imbalances of many different kinds over the course of a number of years. And so today I want to talk specifically about HTMA, so hair tissue mineral analysis, the thyroid, and iodine, and how all of those things can come together. And so simple little disclaimer, of course, this entire presentation does have numbers, it's got protocols, it has resources, and they're all for educational use only. And always work with a qualified professional who knows mineral balance if you decide to implement a protocol. So what is HTMA? HTMA, a hair sample, is used to evaluate its mineral content. It's actually a window into the cell's mineral activity. It gives us a bit of a deeper look into the body than what blood provides for us. Analyzing hair tissue can bring to light toxicities and issues within the body, sometimes months or even years before they will ever be detected in blood serum testing. And it gives us an average of the mineral system's activity for about a 3 to 4 month period. So that can be very valuable, right? Blood is a simple snapshot, right? If we have a banana, the potassium could be elevated on our blood work if we do it within, an hour or 2 hours after. Minerals are a bit different. They take more time to deposit. And so what's so special about them? Well, minerals are what Dr. Henry Schroeder called the spark plugs of life, and I do believe that. They're needed for millions of enzymes as cofactors, facilitators, inhibitors, and as part of the enzymes themselves. Their bioavailability and usability both have a great deal to do with the actual health of the human body. Minerals are the underbelly of what lies above, and without balance, a cascade of metabolic chaos may ensue. And you're going to see just the intricacy of the relationships of minerals as I present the ratios to you today. So the nature of HTMA. So first off, number one, minerals do not deposit randomly in the hair follicle. They're actually deposited in distinct patterns, which is why the information we get from that is so valuable. Two, the minerals reported in an HTMA support healthy functions, not only physical, but also mental. Number three, the HTMA minerals are part of a dynamic system that constantly changes over time. So if you have a specific mineral pattern showing up on, say, a test in 2023, that can change within that year or even in 2024 or 2025. Mineral patterns change. Number four, this dynamic mineral system is delicate and can be disrupted by several factors. Those factors include a lot of our lifestyle choices. So when we look at a holistic picture of our lifestyle, that includes our nutrition, our supplementation, our sleep, our exercise, our mindset, our stress, all of those things affect the mineral system. And so let's talk about some principles of minerals, and then we'll get into the graph. So for those of you who are new to mineral balance, there's two pioneers of minerals, of HTMA testing, and that's Dr. Paul Eck, who is the late Dr. Paul Eck. He passed away in 1996. He was the head of Analytical Research Labs, otherwise known as ARL, which is in Arizona. Then we also have Dr. David Watts, and Dr. Watts is actually still with us and still the head of research at Trace Elements Lab in Texas. And so those two individuals, Dr. Watts was partners with Dr. Eck in their research in the 70s, ended up having a disagreement, which is why there's two labs, ARL and TEI. And, looking at Eck's law of minerals, Dr. Paul Eck stated every mineral has an effect on another mineral. Look at that mineral wheel and how many arrows they have going in every different direction between many different elements. Most people around the world, he says, are mineral deficient. And I do believe that to some extent. We have to dial in our nutrition, but in some cases, if mineral patterns are severe, we need more support than what we can get from the nutrient dense of our food. Symptoms of a mineral deficiency are often identical to symptoms of mineral excess because sometimes minerals that are in excess are biounavailable, so the body can't utilize them and they end up in a toxic state. Minerals can substitute or displace one another. Balance is expressed in ratios mathematically, and we call these the significant ratios, and you're going to learn all about these today. Main minerals need to be maintained and supported in a certain balance, or ultimately disease results. The bioavailability of a mineral is paramount, and that is a very, very important statement because sometimes we have an overabundance, as I mentioned earlier, with regards to a mineral in the body, and it could be biounavailable and ultimately toxic. So let's take a look at the graph. So in this presentation, I work exclusively at this point with Trace Elements International, which is the lab that I mentioned that Dr. David Watts heads up in Texas. So all of the graphs here are going to be representative of what you would see from their results reports. So the HTMA here at Trace Elements, they test for 37 elements. It's actually the most that any lab tests for, which is one of the main reasons that I chose to use them. And so these not only include our vital minerals, which are the nutritional elements that you see here, but also they include additional elements, which we'll touch on later, and of course, our heavy metals. When analyzing any one mineral, we have to look at the big picture. Remember that mineral wheel and all of those interrelationships that have to be considered. And so when we look at that big picture, there's 4 minerals that we call the big 4. And that's calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium. So you can see I've identified these here on the mineral chart below. The calcium being the first one at 57, the magnesium at 7, sodium at 36, and potassium at 15. These particular elements make up the majority of the numbers utilized for the significant ratios. That's how important they are. They can make a huge impact when they move up or down within the body on the functionality of the body. And we're going to learn about that when we look at the ratios themselves. So let's talk about the significant ratios. What are they and why are they significant? So first off, there's 7 main ratios. And I will say that within research from the last couple of years, there are some people that believe now there are 8 main ratios. So you may see another ratio added to this in the near future. All of the 7 main ratios identify systems of the body and how they're working at the cellular level. Identifying imbalances may be seen weeks or months prior to blood work, as I stated earlier, showing us there's a problem and letting you be proactive as a clinician for your clients. Because again, if we're seeing something here that's out of balance, chances are when you do the blood work, it's going to look okay, but you know there's an imbalance coming. Blood always, and so why is that? Blood always wants to be homeostatic, right? So it's going to pull or deposit minerals out or into soft tissue based on the blood's own level because it wants to be in homeostasis. And so this is where those cellular imbalances start to happen. So HTMA can be used as that preventative measure that a lot of people really are looking for so that we can make sure the body is functioning optimally, or we can try to prevent and assist with something that's going awry. The balance of significant ratios is extremely important to understand how the body is functioning at a deeper level than what we see in blood work. So let's look at the ratios themselves. And again, this graph is obviously from Trace Elements. And so we can see there's 7 ratios here, each column representing the ratio that's listed on the left. And so the first column being the calcium to phosphorus. We call this the metabolic ratio. And we're going to get into that in the next couple of slides. The sodium to potassium is called the stress ratio. The calcium to potassium represents the thyroid, and we're of course going to dive into that today. The zinc to copper representing hormone balance. The sodium to magnesium, the Na to Mg, which is 11.05, representing adrenal function. The calcium to magnesium at 7.11, representing blood sugar. And then the iron to copper, which is the furthest one on the right at 0.5, representing infections. And so I'm going to expand on each of those as we go through the next few slides. So first one we're going to look at is what we call fast oxidation. So the metabolic ratio, calcium to phosphorus, Ca to P, it's circled in red there, 1.25. Now, the optimal level for the calcium to phosphorus is 2.6. You can see that those mean levels across within that acceptable range, which are the optimal levels of the ratios. Now, calcium to phosphorus at 1.25 tells us a few things, and I'm going to touch on thyroid last. So the first thing it tells us is that we potentially have overactive adrenals. In this particular case, we do. Higher production of aldosterone is usually present. This shows an attraction to higher levels of meat and fat in the diet. Normally, this person would be craving meat, so this is a traditional true fast oxidizer. They would have a tendency to be warm. And then on the actual nutritional elements in the graph, you would see an excess retention of sodium and potassium, so they would look really high, and a very, very low calcium and magnesium, putting them at a severe risk for a deficiency in both of those nutrient elements. And then with regards to the thyroid, because that's what we're talking about today, I wanted to bring this just up to the table, because it's important to note that usually, not always, but usually, when you have someone that is in fast oxidation like this, where their calcium to phosphorus, their Ca to P is low, you usually have a correlation with that with a low calcium to potassium. And again, this is just very basic. It's not always like that, but in many cases it will be. And so when that calcium to potassium ratio, that Ca to K that green arrow is pointing at, is really low, that tells us we have a bit of an overactive thyroid activity, right? And so it doesn't mean though, well, we're not here to diagnose someone with hyperthyroidism. We're just here to recognize the fact that calcium and potassium have an effect on thyroid expression. And so when we have someone in fast oxidation with traditionally a low calcium for a nutrient element and an elevated or retained potassium, that could be causing a little bit of overactivity in the thyroid. And we are going to get into this more as we go through and talk about thyroid function throughout the presentation. So fast oxidation. And so I touched on this here with attraction to higher levels of meat and fat in the diet. And that's why fast oxidizers are usually easy to identify, because they crave fattier cuts of meat and more fat in the diet, right? It doesn't slow them down, it satiates them and it gives them energy, right? So they thrive on fattier cuts of meat. They thrive on organ meats that have higher levels of copper. They thrive on higher fat, right? 6 to 10 tablespoons of added fat per day on top of the fattier cuts of meat and the organ meats. What they don't thrive on are carbohydrates, right? They make them feel hot and sweaty and overactive, just because carbohydrates, I always say it's kind of like, well, and let's put the avoid fruit and simple sugar into the mix too, because if we have fast burning carbs and then we have fruit and simple sugar, what does that act like when you think about a fire, right? I call the metabolism, we're fueling a fire. So if you have a nice burning fire, right, that's going well, and you throw kindling on it, what does that do exactly? Well, the kindling burns up really quick, and all of a sudden the fire starts flaming out of control. So how do we calm that fire? Well, we calm that fire by putting larger logs on. So think of the larger logs like fattier cuts of meat and higher fat foods, and the kindling as carbohydrates, fruits, and simple sugars, okay? Now, let's flip the coin on that. And let's talk about the opposite slow oxidation. So you can see here, so last time the Ca to P, the calcium to phosphorus, is at 1.25. Here it's at 36.36. So extremely, extremely elevated. So what does that mean for us? Well, again, I'll address thyroid last. Means we have sluggish adrenals in most cases, right? When it's this high. We have a lower production of aldosterone. We have a very poor retention of sodium and potassium. So chances are, if you were to look at that first graph that we looked at, the nutrient elements that showed us the calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, the sodium and potassium would be really, really low. Calcium ends up building up in the soft tissues. And magnesium ends up elevated, which, what did we talk about earlier? Being bio-unavailable, right? And so they look really high on that nutrient element graph. And so the amazing thing is that I want you to understand is that 80% of the people that have ever been tested with hair tissue mineral analysis fall into this pattern. Maybe not to this extreme, but they're slow oxidizers, right? And what's the last thing that we see? We see underactive thyroid expression. So when you look at the calcium to potassium here, follow that green arrow, it's at 254.5 and the ideal is 4.2. The higher that ratio gets, the more sluggish the thyroid expression is. And so in this particular case, you have to ask yourself two questions. A, do we have hypothyroidism on board, right? Again, if you're not a licensed physician, you're not here to diagnose, but it's a consideration. Or do we just have a really severe mineral pattern that we need to balance, right? Because the thyroid in this particular individual might be excreting the proper amount of hormones, but they're not getting into the cell anymore. So we'll expand on that a little bit later. And so remember when I talked about that fire, talking about the metabolic fire, slow oxidizer nutrition focuses on putting more kindling on the fire because the fire is dwindling. Right? So if we have a roaring metabolic fire for a fast oxidizer, we need some bigger logs to kind of slow it down just a little bit to get a more even, balanced burn, right? The slow oxidizer has barely a flame coming out of that, right? Their metabolic rate has dropped. And so we need to bring some balance into the picture with some higher protein, but it needs to be lean protein, right? A lot of added fat and high purine and high fat proteins are going to slow this fire down even further, right? If you throw a huge tree trunk log on a fire that's barely burning, it's going to go out, right? So that's why a lot of times slow oxidizers really lack energy, especially after they eat a heavier fat meal. And that's why. So we need to focus on a little bit more kindling to start revving that fire up. And so that, again, lower fat, not that you don't need any, we all need good healthy fats, but just not as much. And then lots of starchy and complex carbohydrates, right? Because those are that faster burning fuel. And then we want to make sure that we've got lots of high potassium and sodium foods on board. That's going to be really, really important for the slow oxidizer. And then, of course, avoiding those high calcium foods. Why? Because the calcium to potassium and the calcium to phosphorus ratio are really high. So if we put calcium into the mix, it's only going to make those ratios even higher and slow them down even more. So again, avoiding those types of foods. And again, it's not forever, but it's for now because the pattern is telling us that it's not warranted. So that was an in-depth kind of look at the metabolic ratio, which I think is really important because some people mentally feel like they're, say, a fast oxidizer, but they end up being slow. Their body isn't responding the same anymore. It's an important ratio for us to be able to assess and for clinicians to use nutrition, intelligent nutrition, right? Because now we know exactly what breakdown of macronutrients this person needs in order to function optimally right now, right? And again, mineral patterns change. So those nutritional changes will come as well. So now let's dig into the rest of the ratios. We've got 6 more to talk about. So let's talk about the sodium to potassium ratio. So this particular one's at 14. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. But what is this ratio called? So first of all, we talk about it as the stress ratio. So for those of you who have seen another presentation, I did talk about in my copper presentation about the stages of stress and the general adaptation syndrome for stress. And so that's why this is called the stress ratio. And so the stress ratio is also labeled the vitality ratio. So this ratio, if it's within the range, in a good range, which is about 2.2 to 2.7, that's ideal, we have stress resiliency, and that's where we want to be, because then the body responds well to stress, right? In the older days, I want to say back in maybe the 70s, 80s, and this kind of has fallen off, but it was called the life-death ratio, because the lower this ratio gets, the less energy someone has. That's a bit scary though for clients. So we've kind of put that one under the rug. And so when we look at a ratio greater than 2.7, that means we're in that alarm acute stage of stress. We're running from a bear. There's an acute stressor in front of us and we're running away, right? But your body can only keep up with that for so long. And so then what happens is this ratio will start to invert, right? It starts to go down. And what does that mean? It means if we have a ratio somewhere below 2.2, then we're running into exhaustion and burnout, right? Chronic stress. And it's interesting because this ratio, first of all, this ratio is one of the most important on the test. And second, this ratio really brings a lot to the table when we're talking about individuals, because of the fact that some people don't feel stressed, but their ratio tells us they're stressed. So this tells us about the person and their mindset. It also identifies the electrical potential in the cells. It represents the sodium potassium pump, and it's linked to kidney, liver, and adrenal function. So this is a secondary adrenal ratio. So let's talk about the thyroid now. So thyroid ratio, this is the same example we used in the last, in the slow oxidizer example. And so you can see here the optimal ratio is 4.2. So again, you see all the numbers there in the mean of the reference range, of the acceptable range. If it's greater than 4.4, we have sluggish thyroid function or expression. If it's less than 3.8, then overactivity. And so you can see here, this person has a very, very underactive thyroid expression. It's at 254.5. And so again, we don't see a ton of these, but we see enough. And usually it comes from something else that's the root cause, and potentially magnesium deficiency. So number 4 is our zinc to copper hormone ratio. So we're halfway through the significant ratios. What's the optimal level? It's 8. This particular one's pretty close. It's 8.64. And so the ideal range is between 7 and 9. If it's greater than 9, which you see quite often in men, that tells us that there's testosterone dominance. And if you see it high in women, it could be progesterone dominance, or it could also be a mark towards hidden copper imbalance. And if it's less than 7, that could mean we have estrogen dominance on board and potentially copper toxicity. So a few things that can be obtained with looking at the zinc to copper ratio. Now, our primary adrenal ratio is the sodium to magnesium. So this particular one's at 3.53, so it's quite strong. Now, the optimum is 4. The ideal range is 3.5 to 5. And then if we have greater than 5, that's when we have a bit of hyperactivity from the adrenals, right? And when it's less than that, we have hypoactivity. So you would be surprised how many sodium to magnesium ratios I see under 1.0, right? And that's severe chronic stress. And so, in these particular cases, it really gives us a good idea of what's happening in the body, and if the body is starting to falter with its reaction to the stress that could either be happening again from, remember what I said, what affects minerals, lifestyle factors. And you have to remember those lifestyle factors have to include something called hidden stressors, right? When we have imbalances in the body, when we have pathogens on board, when we have candida, when we have other mold, right? Other things on board, this causes changes in the mineral pattern and stress on the body, even though the person might not realize that that is actually happening. Calcium to magnesium, this one's at 7.11, again, quite balanced. And that is our blood sugar ratio. So the optimal level is 7. The ideal is 4.5 to 8.5, so a bit of a larger spread. Greater than 8.5, we could have someone who has severe hypoglycemic reactions, and less than 4.5 hyperglycemic reactions. Both can point towards, kind of a preemptive state where someone, if it isn't fixed and supported, could end up going down the road of diabetes. Calcium aids in insulin release, magnesium inhibits insulin release, and supports blood sugar regulation. So very important to have those in balance. Iron to copper is the infection ratio. That's the last one on the list. And so here it's 1.08. The optimum is 0.9. The ideal range is 0.8 to 1.1. Greater than 1.1, we could have potential of bacteria, right? So pathogenic bacteria on board. Less than 0.8 could point us towards a virus. Both iron and copper are involved in cellular respiration and electron transport. And when they're out of balance, again, there could be issues in the body with regards to bacteria and viruses. Now, I have seen this very elevated, like 3.6, 4.1, and that's when we go back and start looking at other diagnostic tests to correlate, right? If we have stool samples and things like that. So really important to kind of take this as a first step to see if there's more digging that needs to be done. And of course, always correlate with client symptoms. So now let's touch on some minerals that have a direct effect on thyroid. And one of them, of course, is going to be iodine, but I want to talk about a few others first. So selenium. And so I pulled these from a few different sources, and I'm going to talk about the books that I've quoted here a little later when we get into iodine protocols. And so in this particular case, adequate selenium levels are necessary for regulating thyroid function and iodine metabolism. And that's why one of the reasons why when you look at protocols, and if any of you have gone down the road of iodine protocols in the past, selenium is one of the most important cofactors to include. It's critical for the function of the thyroid, and it's particularly abundant in this gland. Unfortunately, selenium deficiency is a very common condition worldwide. And we have to take into consideration the fact too that selenium sufficiency is a very fine line of dosing because it is an extremely ultra trace mineral. It's only micro doses, right? Micrograms that we're supplementing with. And selenium can become toxic. So we have to have the right amount of selenium on board. And that's one of the other amazing features when we're looking at analyzing hair is that the selenium level is identified for us. Selenium-dependent enzymes are also required for the conversion of T4 to biologically active T3. And selenium is the primary mineral responsible for that conversion from T4 to T3 in the liver. So really, really important mineral for thyroid. And so as I mentioned, with regards to seeing the selenium on the HTMA test, and I'll mention this again when I go into analyzing or assessing for iodine insufficiency, is looking at the nutrient markers, right, at the vital mineral markers that are on the HTMA test, why it's so critically important. It's telling us what this person's body actually needs right now. And that's an amazing thing to have access to, that blueprint that allows us to know exactly what supplementation will benefit them, because everybody is different. Calcium and thyroid. So this was taken from Dr. Paul Eck's website newsletter, and you can read all of them by visiting our arltma.com. Lots of great information there. And so he says the hair calcium level is an approximate thyroid effect indicator. So thyroid hormone lowers calcium in the body. The higher the level of hair calcium in general, the lower the effective activity of the thyroid gland. Hair calcium and magnesium levels are associated with cell permeability, and that's important. Bio-unavailable calcium and magnesium stabilize cell membranes, which causes reduced cell membrane permeability that decreases thyroid hormone uptake into the cells. This produces a cellular thyroid hormone deficiency. So when we have hair levels of calcium and magnesium that are elevated, this can actually block the absorption. So again, where we don't have a thyroid problem, but we have a cell permeability problem that are being affected by those two minerals. Serum hormone levels may look normal or even elevated on blood work. High hair calcium and magnesium levels indicate some degree of biounavailable calcium and magnesium. This occurs mainly, of course, in slow metabolizers. So again, that metabolic rate where it's just a barely dwindling fire where we need to kind of stoke it in order to get things going. And so since serum hormone levels are normal or elevated, many times a physician may not give thyroid support when it's actually needed, right? And again, sometimes I always say it's good to start with minerals make the assessment, and then see if we need to support the thyroid, because maybe we don't have a thyroid problem, maybe we have a mineral imbalance. Potassium and thyroid. So again, from Dr. Paul Eck, the potassium level is associated with the sensitivity of the tissues to thyroid hormone. Low hair potassium is associated with reduced sensitivity of the mitochondrial receptors to thyroid hormone. Even if circulating hormone levels are normal and hormones can be absorbed into the cells, when tissue potassium is low, they may not be utilized, resulting in a low thyroid effect. That's how important potassium is for thyroid function. This commonly contributes to thyroid problems in slow metabolizers. And iodine supports the body's retention of potassium. Interesting. So now let's dive into thyroid and iodine and what iodine actually is. So iodine is a slightly acid-forming mineral that may be referred to as the thyroid mineral. Every cell in the body utilizes iodine in some form or another. Severe iodine deficiency causes hypothyroidism that results in impaired somatic growth and motor development in children. Mild and moderate iodine deficiencies cause multifocal autonomous growth of the thyroid, which results in thyrotoxicosis. One of the main problems faced today is not necessarily iodine deficiency, but environmental contamination with iodine antagonists. So we may not have iodine deficiency, but if we have enough environmental antagonists on board that are clogging up iodine receptors, then we do have an insufficient iodine being provided to the body. Iodine antagonists, so what are they? What are these environmental factors? So these we refer to as iodine antagonists. Fluorides are the worst iodine antagonists. The main source today is our fluorinated water supply, right? Tap water in many cases has fluoride. Great for our teeth, not for our thyroid, right? Then we have bromine and bromides, right? Those are highly toxic elements. And when iodine is supplemented, the individual eliminates bromides from the body as iodine replaces bromine on enzyme binding sites. And so the other interesting fact too is that if someone starts to supplement with something that is rich in iodine, they may have negative effects. And sometimes it's because these halides are being circulating in the body, and they're causing these symptoms because the person is toxic with halides. And then when the iodine starts to bind to those receptors, now we have circulating halides, which starts to cause symptoms. Now in Canada and some other European countries, we actually banned the practice of using potassium bromate in baked goods back in the 1990s. It actually replaced iodine. And in some countries, however, you may still find it in fire retardants for cars and furniture. So there still could be exposure out there, not in Canada, but in other countries. Chlorine and chlorinated compounds are also highly toxic to most water supplies, and again, can take up space on iodine receptors. Intake of iodine through diet may be ineffective if receptors are clogged with halides. So if iodine can't get onto the receptors where it needs to be, then we're going to have a deficient state. And so what other things cause iodine deficiency? Well, we have a lack of dietary iodine just in general. Japanese people actually consume about 6.25 milligrams to 45 milligrams of iodine daily, if you can believe that. The recommended daily allowance in the US is only 150 micrograms. We're not even in the ballpark, right? Lack of access to freshwater food products might be another one. People might not have access to those freshwater foods that are rich in iodine. The other thing that we may come across is that there's an avoidance of sea products due to the potential mercury contamination. People are concerned about heavy metals, and rightfully so, right? So this is some of what's affecting us getting enough iodine just in our everyday diets. And what does that bring to the table for us when we're talking about iodine? Well, there's a multitude of different symptoms from iodine deficiency. You could have fatigue, right? Frustration, depression is a big one. Hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism. The thyroid is affected when iodine isn't sufficient. You could have cold hands and feet, right? And symptom of hypothyroidism. Slow oxidation, right? So I talked about that metabolic fire that's just barely burning, and we need to keep kind of throwing the kindling on there until it starts to spark. That's slow oxidation, and that could be from iodine deficiency as well. Weight gain can be another one, and disorders related to calcium metabolism. And the list continues. We could have irritability, anxiety, possible infertility, electrical imbalance in the cells, loss of hair. This is a huge one. When we have iodine deficiency in a lot of cases, we could have severe hair thinning, severe hair loss. I know when I started supplementing and kind of using higher doses of iodine, and I've done this a few times throughout the past kind of almost 15 years, I went through a major hair loss and then a major hair growth and kind of back again. Like it really does affect the hair. Estrogen dominance is another one. Graves' disease, Hashimoto's, right? Autoimmune. Thyroid nodules is another one that can be from iodine deficiency. And so looking at Dr. Brownstein's book, and again, I'm going to tell you about that in a minute, he said there's even more involved with iodine deficiency. He related iodine deficiency back to attention deficit disorder, autoimmune problems. We already mentioned Graves and Hashis, breast cancers, right? Fatigue, hypertension, infections, liver diseases, vaginal infections, headaches, endometriosis, fibroids, all these things he wrote about in his book, and he relates them back to iodine deficiency. So huge list of conditions, issues, and symptoms that can come when the body doesn't have sufficient iodine. And again, remember, it's not about us ingesting iodine necessarily, but it's about us cleaning up inside the body with some of those halides and toxins that are clogging up our receptors. Because even if we are getting in small amounts of iodine, it may not be on the receptors where it actually needs to be. And so let's talk about assessing iodine deficiency. And so this is a really, really intricate part of being able to utilize some different ways to assess iodine deficiency in clients. And so the first one is using HTMA to assess iodine deficiency. So there's research that with regards to different levels of minerals that actually may point us towards a deficiency. And there's really some commonalities, and I'll kind of point them out when we get to the graph next, because I think that there's a couple of kind of standout things that are pretty common and can identify the deficiency very simply. And so the minerals that we're looking at, and we're looking at one ratio here, is we're looking at, first off, lithium and potassium. So it's really, really hard for the body to hang on to lithium and potassium if it doesn't have adequate iodine. Okay, so those two, it's interesting because I see this all the time. People are like, I've been doing mineral balance for I don't know how long, and my lithium and potassium are always low. No matter how much of whatever I take, coconut water, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much I take, they're always low. Well, what about your iodine status? Have you tested your iodine? Have you done the markers? Have you ever used iodine? Are you using kelp, right? There's lots of options for iodine support. Then we have to look at copper. Is the level really high or really low, right? Calcium to potassium ratio, where does that fall? Remember, that's the thyroid ratio. The higher it gets, the more sluggish the thyroid effect is. The level of calcium, how high is that? The level of selenium, how low is it? And the level of mercury, how high is it? All of those factors affect iodine. So let's look at the actual assessment. And so I want to bring a graph into the picture here because I'm a very visual person. So this particular individual is a 35-year-old female, very typical pattern. There's a lot going on here, but we're only assessing the markers for iodine, so we're not going to talk about anything else. So is calcium greater than 50 milligram percent? Yeah, it's at 139. And I said earlier, remember when we talked about elevations in calcium and magnesium and slow oxidizers, which this person is, being biounavailable. That's exactly what we're looking at here. And usually when we have biounavailable calcium at this level, chances are you're going to have an underactive thyroid expression, and chances are you're going to need iodine. But there's a few more markers we can assess. So is potassium less than 4? Yeah, it is. Do we have a copper imbalance? Is it less than 1.5 or greater than 2.5? Yeah, it's at 1. So yeah, we do. Is the selenium less than 0.08? Yeah, it's at 0.06. So we're batting 100 here. Mercury greater than 0.02. Yep, 0.07. And is lithium less than 0.004, which is the optimal? Yeah, it's at 0.002. So far, just looking at the markers, right? The Ca, the K, the Cu, the Se, and that's in the main nutritional elements, the purple graph, moving over to the toxic elements where you see the Hg that has a small elevation, that's mercury, and then going down to the additional elements where you can find the Li, which is lithium, and all of those markers point to a iodine deficiency. And so we have 7 markers. So there's one more we have to look at, which is a ratio. So is the calcium to potassium, the thyroid ratio, is it greater than 10.1, right? Is it showing a sluggish thyroid expression? Yeah, it's at 46.33. So this particular individual has 7 out of 7 markers for deficiency, right? So, and that's what our final assessment shows. So we in here, I would assess this as iodine deficiency, and I would prep this person for iodine implementation. And so there are other tests, as I mentioned, that you can use. Those other tests being, so first test is an iodine loading test. And I encourage people to use this test alongside HTMA as well as blood work, right? Because all three, again, when you're looking at an individual, there's a lot of information that HTMA can tell you. But if you're going down the road of using iodine, Lugol's iodine, then you need to look at the big picture and make sure you have all of the factors in front of you before that implementation. If you're using something like sea kelp, right, and we'll talk about organic sea kelp, then maybe all of these factors aren't necessary. Maybe they're interesting, right? But when you're using an iodine protocol, you need to make sure you have the whole picture. And so Hakala Labs is a lab in the US, and they have what they call a 24-hour iodine load test. And so basically what happens is you stop using any iodine, or if somebody's been using iodine, they go off for a week ahead of time. And then what they do is they have 1 tablet of Iodoro. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Iodoro, all it is a tablet form of Lugol's iodine. So it's iodine and potassium iodide. And that's 50 milligrams. So it's quite a high dose. Not a lot of iodine practitioners use that dose anymore. And so what you want to see is if the release in the urine over a 24-hour period is 90% or higher. And so because that 90% is where we want to be to make sure that someone has sufficient iodine levels. Now, some limitations are what? The environmental factors, right? Halides. If we have a bunch of halides taking up space on the iodine receptors, the person could be urinating out the iodine and it's not getting absorbed. So when you do, or if you choose to go down this road and use Hakala Labs, I always suggest putting the halide markers on there because they can be tested as well in the urine, right? The bromide, the chloride, and the fluoride, because then you know if any of those are elevated. Because if you have an iodine that comes in at 80%, and then you have bromide that's over the acceptable limit and fluoride that's over the acceptable limit, then you don't have actual 80% of iodine. It's probably more like 50, right? So you need to know what those halides are to know if the iodine's actually being absorbed properly. And then blood labs. So you can review blood labs to make sure the thyroid assessment is good. And, there's some specifics there that I didn't list here. We don't really have time for those, but, you just want to look at the big picture. TSH, when you use iodine, TSH may temporarily increase. Okay, so that's normal as long as it starts to come back down within a particular period of time. You want to measure the free T3 and the total T3 and the reverse T3, and total T3 isn't a normal measure in Canada, right? But we need to know what that is. Because total T3 and divided by reverse T3, we should have a good thyroid level of about 10 to 14. And if we don't, then we could have iodine deficiency and we could have other issues going on. And then free T4 and antibodies. The antibodies are the important one, because if you're going to choose to study and use iodine in your practice, you need to know what the thyroid peroxidase antibodies are at. Because if they're high, then you can't use the same or high doses of iodine with that high level. It doesn't work out properly, okay? So that's the one caveat. You have to make sure you know what the TPO antibodies are, and if they are elevated, you need to adjust a protocol. So let's talk about the iodine protocol. And I mean, a lot of people, a lot of clinicians, a lot of practitioners like to keep it simple. They use kelp, right? It's an effective multi-nutrient, has 20 to 30 essential trace minerals, probably even more than that. It's rich in iodine, which supports healthy cell functionality and the thyroid, high in antioxidants, right, that ward off free radicals. And the only thing that I want to make sure that you understand is that you need to ensure that your kelp is coming from or certified organic, right? You don't want that kelp to be full of contaminants. We just talked about people being afraid of mercury and other contaminants in sources, in sea sources, right? In ocean sources. So make sure that if you're choosing a kelp, whether it's a powder or capsules or whatever it is for your client, that it is certified organic. Okay, that's important. And so here's your books, because I'm going to go into the cofactors. I'm going to talk a little bit more about iodine, but if you want to use iodine, you've got to read the resources. So these are three of my favorite. I also studied under who would be considered an iodine expert for years to learn more, right? I always wanted to learn more. And so starting off with Iodine Crisis, I think is great. Lynn Farrow, fantastic book. She also has a Facebook group about that book as well. Iodine, Why You Need It, Why You Can't Live Without It. David Brownstein, the 5th edition is the latest one. That's a great book too. And then Healing with Iodine, The Missing Link to Better Health by Dr. Mark Sirkis, another fabulous read. And so all three of those books are going to give some really good detail about cofactors, iodine implementation, salt loading, using sea salt appropriately, because that, along with selenium, are, in my opinion, the two most important cofactors when you're talking about iodine, because you need selenium sufficient cells and you need halides to be flushed off receptors, and sea salt helps with that. Okay. And the one thing I will say, just as kind of a background to this, is I did mention it briefly earlier. A lot of us that deal with iodine now aren't using the same doses as what's talked about in these books. And the reason being is because there can be a lot of negative symptoms that come along with those doses. I've chosen to lower my dose significantly, and I've had really good results by doing that. And I think those 50 milligram doses, and a lot of the ones that are written about in some of these previous books, I think that those just need to be lower, but the rest of the information is very relevant. So the cofactors, what are they? So they're listed. I talked about selenium, right? We know how important that is. Magnesium. Magnesium is important as an iodine cofactor. Vitamin C is another one. And then vitamin B2 and B3, both important as ATP cofactors. And the only thing I want to say is vitamin B3, we just want to make sure that's no flush niacin. So you want to have either niacinamide on board, or you want to have inositol hexacotinate, not niacin, because the doses are way too high, and that niacin flush would be pretty severe. And then protocol guidelines start with the cofactors, right? And this is all part of mineral balance. If you start with HTMA, you're going to have most of those things on board anyways. Because again, a lot of the people that you're working with are going to be slow oxidizers that have that iodine deficiency, right? That underactivity in the thyroid expression. And so they're going to be on the vitamin C and the magnesium, and most likely B3, potentially B2, and they're going to have selenium on board anyways. And then take those for about 4 to 6 weeks before implementing any iodine support, even if it is organic kelp. And increase that Celtic sea salt, right? We need to make sure that we're getting in enough sea salt to help flush those halides from the iodine receptors so that the body's ready to absorb the iodine that it's going to be receiving. And so the only caveat I have to that is make sure the sodium level on the HTMA isn't overly excessive, okay? Because your sea salt may need to be adjusted just slightly, okay? Some people do salt loading. And so you can definitely do this. I've used this for pulse dosing. So salt loading once a week prior to implementation, 1 week prior to implementation. So basically all you're doing is you're putting about a 1/4 teaspoon of Celtic sea salt into about a 1/2 cup of hot water. And again, hot enough that you can drink the whole thing, and then finish off with about 12 ounces of cool water and consume it all at once, and then wait for 30 minutes and do it again. And you're going to do that until they have to urinate, basically. And so that's a great way to kind of top up and build on those sodium stores. And again, in general cases, this works really well. I don't tend to use it as much anymore unless someone has symptoms. But again, since I've adjusted my doses, I don't use it all that much anymore. But, and it gives people a little bit more energy if their sodium's really low on HTMA as well. And so let's visit one of my client cases, because I always love sharing a client case. So let's dive into that. So client here, symptoms. This obviously is a depiction of her. It's not her actually. So her severely thinning hair. Okay. General feeling of unwell. Multiple food allergies, extreme fatigue. She had bloating, gas, the GI dysbiosis symptoms. She had toenail fungus, so I knew there was probably candida on board. Lack of sleep, right? She couldn't sleep, insomnia, and then general kind of overall pain, unwell, just not feeling great. And so, and basically that kept her from, when she, on her intake form, she said it was keeping her from working, participating in hobbies she liked, and conducting normal life. And that's not a great place to be or feel. So here's the beginning of our journey. And I literally, again, just want to point out kind of two things that we take away from this. And she had obviously a ton of markers. You can go back to the other slides. She had a ton of markers with regards to iodine insufficiency. And so her calcium, 382, very, very, very excessive calcium. So if we take 382 and divide the potassium, which is at 3, her calcium to potassium, which is their thyroid ratio, is at 127. So really, really underactive thyroid here. And she just, a lot of those symptoms are coming from some of these imbalances that we see. And obviously the calcium and magnesium are contributing. So the first protocol, we supported mineral balance, right? Reduced tissue calcification, that was one of our goals, right? We want to get the calcium out of the soft tissues and back into the bones. And we wanted to put cofactors in for iodine because I wanted to use iodine support in phase 2. And so we wanted some electrolytes on board, right? We changed the nutrition, get her on the slow oxidizer nutrition plan, support the digestion, support the organs, and then bring on some good probiotics for the GI, and then a binder to support whatever toxins we're going to move, right? Because I always want to have a binder on board. We need to mop up toxins. So we did that for 3.5 months, and she retested. So what happened? Well, her calcium went from 382 down to 98. Great movement, okay? Her magnesium bio-1 availability went from 53 down to 12. That's an amazing improvement as well. Her sodium potassium stayed about the same, but for me, that was okay. And look at her thyroid expression. She was at 127.33 down to 24.5. So some major improvements here. And even with regards to her calcium to phosphorus, the Ca to P went from 15.28 to 5.76. So that was an increase in her metabolic rate as well. So she was feeling much, much better. So let's look at what happened. So her thinning hair had started to improve. She was generally feeling better. Her food allergies were starting to decrease. She wasn't affected by as many foods. Her fatigue was improving. She had more energy through the day. Her GI symptoms were getting better. Her toenail fungus and her general pain were almost gone. And her lack of sleep had improved as well. She was sleeping almost all the way through the night. And so she basically said, I'm starting to feel like myself again, right? So I was super happy with regards to this. And so we continued with a very similar protocol, just with regards to the mineral support, the electrolytes. We were continuing to use iodine and monitoring that with blood labs. And then of course, still supporting digestion, organs, a little binder support. And then we switched to a different probiotic. And so kind of in closing, it's like, why HTMA, right? Well, first of all, it opened the door for me in my healing journey to get to the root cause of why I was suffering. That was the main thing. It's the only reason I went down this road. It's a non-invasive diagnostic test with valuable information about the body at a deeper level than what blood work can give you. And in the past several years, I've seen tremendous long-lasting results in thousands of cases. And the evaluation and assessment of HTMA is critical whether you're assessing for potential elevated tissue calcium, which can affect thyroid, iodine deficiency, which can affect thyroid and other things, of course, or copper imbalances. Minerals literally are the building blocks of health. So starting there is always a good idea. So I'm going to open the floor for questions. I'm just going to end my slideshow and I will stop my screen share and then we'll be able to answer some questions for you guys. Okay, here we are. All right. So pop your questions in the chat. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer those. Hopefully I opened that right. Okay, so thank you for that great info. I work primarily with postpartum mothers looking to know how much you've utilized the HTMA in practice with postpartum women, hoping to incorporate that into my practice. Yeah, so I mean, we've actually just gotten into working with a perinatal expert and kind of launching some mineral balances for prenatal and postnatal, which has been really great. And we saw some really major kind of, and again, I don't want to say that mineral patterns, you want to change those kind of with regards to where they're at, but you can support them. And that's really important, because then, supporting them to get through that process successfully is going to be important. And then a little bit later, they can obviously kind of dig a little deeper to make changes in patterns. Where can we access the test and so you can most likely, qualified practitioners can apply for a test or an account with Trace Elements Lab in Texas. And I think they charge $61 US for the test. So it's one of the most cost-effective diagnostic tests that you can get. Excellent. Anybody else with questions?
I do see one question in the chat box.
Oh, okay.
It says, where can we access the test and how much is it?
Yeah, I just answered that one in the other box too. It's the same question.
Oh, did you? Okay. Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, awesome. So thank you so much, everyone. Are there any more questions?
I think we have one more. So our receptors have an affinity for the mineral over a toxic element that binds to the same receptor. Is there any reason our body would hold on to the toxic element over the mineral if the mineral's not there? That's some of the answer. And I feel like with regards to the halides in general, I'm not sure our receptors obviously want the mineral. But if it hasn't had the mineral in a while and if the pattern of using those toxic elements is there, then obviously it's going to take some time to flush those off, and they can come with symptoms. Thank you, Lisa. If thyroid antibodies are more than 100, would you recommend iodine? So that's a question, so which antibodies, right? Are we talking about TGB? Are we talking about TPO? It depends. And I would definitely want to see an HTMA and a full blood panel to be able to comment on that. And again, it goes back to the dose of iodine, right? If you're talking about using micrograms, you're probably safe. But if you're talking about using milligrams, then definitely have to look a little bit more into that. Excellent. Anybody else with questions? Because I think we're almost ready to do the draw.
Yes, we
perfect. I love it. Love it.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you
my pleasure.
for this amazing webinar. It is so greatly appreciated. Thank you all again for joining today. I just want to see, so the winner of the prize is Katie Pajuman. If you're still on, Katie, can you send a message in the chat box just to let us know that you're still here? Just checking if you're here. I don't think she's here. Okay, give me a second. I'm going to pick someone else's name out of my hat. Give me a quick sec.
Katie's going to be disappointed she left. All right, I feel like we need a drum roll. Inder is drawing the name as we speak. We need a drum roll for the next person.
I got her. So perfect. It's Lydia Brezinova. I don't sure if I pronounce that right, but just Lydia, just give us a wave or a hello in the chat, and then we'll have all of your email address sent over to Lisa, and then she'll take care of you from there. So if you're here, just send us a quick hello.
Oh, Lydia's here. Yay!
Lydia,
Yeah, it's in the Q&A.
Oh, in the Q&A. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah,
Awesome.
she's here.
So
Excellent. Well, congratulations, Lydia. Yay.
yeah, I just want to write her name down here.
Sure.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So thank you
Excellent.
so much again, Lisa. And we are looking forward to seeing you all, in the course. So the course begins April 25th and it's 6 classes. You can register by emailing Colleen at instituteofholisticnutrition.com. You can also see the posts coming up in our newsletter. There's always going to be a link there that you can go in and register, as well as through Instagram and Facebook. So there's plenty of ways to register. Check out all the details. And if you have any questions, like I said, you can email Colleen or give us a call at the campus. Okay, we're more than happy to help.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me and have a great day, everybody.
Okay, bye.